So I think we probably have a lot of questions that we'd like to ask you, but I believe that Senator Reed has arrived. And so if he could come in, and we'll have him join us and speak, and if there is any time left, we'll do some Q&A. And Senator Reed, podium is.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank General Clark especially, and all these people will realize that I am in podium defilade because they're military people. It means the podium is as big as I am. So welcome everybody. And I want to thank, again, let me thank Wes Clark not only for being here today, for his comments, but also for his extraordinary leadership and contribution to the country and his friendship over many years. Thanks, Wes. I also want to thank Scott Skylar from the Sustainable Energy Coalition, as well as Carol Werner and Amory Laporte from the Environmental and Energy Study Institute for helping us organize this effort. Thanks so much, Carol, and your colleagues. You've done a tremendous job. This is a very, very thoughtful discussion this morning. And I want to thank the panelists because you've lended great expertise and practical experience and insights that are hugely valuable to our efforts. And I hope that this is just one of many conversations about the military's emphasis on the efficient use of energy and how lessons from military experience can be translated into civilian practice and commercial practice. And frankly, energy efficiency, energy conservation is critical to our warfighting mission. And this has been the case throughout history. You go through any major campaign, and I think one of the famous phrases was, I believe, Napoleon, an army moves on its stomach. I think that was him. But you go to any campaign. I was struck, we did a little research. The Red Ball Express, which was the famous effort in Europe in World War II to supply Patton's Third Army so the tanks could keep moving, the decisive thrust that finally defeated the German forces. They were moving 400,000 gallons of gasoline a day to our tanks, and it only took them 300,000 gallons of gasoline to get the fuel there. So efficiency of delivery is not some concept just for aesthetics and commercial and private activities. It's an essential part of military operations. And that's why DoD has concentrated so much on this effort. It's an operational necessity. It's not just a nice thing to do. And as the panelists indicated, when DoD is talking about energy efficiency, it's not to be green, it's to be an effective fighting force. For example, in recent conflicts, over 52% of our casualties during Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan came from logistic convoys moving along ground lines of control. We lost people trying to get supplies to other forces. In Iraqi freedom, over 20% of the casualties came from protecting convoys. And 70 to 80% of the weight of those convoys was fuel and water. Some units at forward operating bases, particularly in Afghanistan, needed aerial resupply every 3 days. And again, fuel and water made up 70% of the cargo. So the basics, the fuel to run the generators, to run the vehicles, the water just to survive, is difficult to get there, and is a price. And it's just not a monetary price. It's a price of forces engaged and forces suffering casualties. Now, once we've done some work on, particularly on the FOBs, the forward operating bases in Afghanistan, we were able to start reducing the dependency on these land convoys, et cetera, and these aircraft resupply. And the result was that we needed, obviously, less in terms of resupply, less force protection to protect the convoys, and we could use these assets, and I'm looking at the experts here, more effectively for other operations, engaging enemy forces, protecting our forces, other critical installations. Now, there's another aspect to this. I talked about fuel and water, bulk cargoes. But there's something else that has happened, and Wes is a contemporary. He's a class of 1965 from West Point. I'm class of 71, so this is ancient history. But when we were kicking around, An infantryman was carrying a lot on his back, and they were all men. Now we have female infantry officers. But what's happened is that troops are carrying many more electronics today than they did back in the good old days. When Captain Clark and Captain Reed were running around, the most sophisticated piece of equipment we had was a starlight scope. It was about that long. We had one for company. You could see at night with it. Today, everything is electronic, practically. In fact, a unit today in the Army has 16 times more energy consuming devices on them than back in the good old days. And so that means for a 72-hour patrol, an Army infantry typically carry at least 14 pounds of replacement batteries. And we would have PRC-25 radios with maybe 2 or 3 extra batteries, pretty bulky for that RTO, radio operator, but they'd share them around. But it wasn't a big deal. Now, just to keep the electronics operating, the bulk of weight that you have to carry in an infantry unit is incredible. And so the military has been working on that. They've tried to decrease, and they have, the weight by about 70%, and they're trying to reduce the weight of the typical rucksack that a troop carries by about 33%. So if we can do very sophisticated things in making batteries smaller, making them more effective, more powerful, that has a tremendous impact all the way down to the individual soldier. And in fact, they're doing some research where they're trying to make rucksacks and knee braces energy generating. And I'm not a scientist, so I don't know how they're going to do this, but I wish them well. Now, we talked about, in the context of military operations, water. And it is a critical issue. As I mentioned, about 60% of these logistical convoys are moving water around. You can't live without water. It takes a lot to pump processed water. We usually rely upon bottled water in combat areas because it's more flexible to move around. And DoD spends about $400 million a year on bottled water alone. Again, if we can find ways to generate safely and effectively water, that is critical to operational units. And there's another aspect of water, too, that I think at least has to be mentioned. That is, and we've talked to defense scholars, climate change is rapidly becoming a key national security issue. And one of the demonstrable impacts is water. First of all, the oceans are rising, so countries like Bangladesh, if they lose 2 or 3 feet or increase tidal waters by 2 or 3 feet, that's not just inconvenient, that's a crisis. But also in areas of drought. There has been some speculation that one of the factors contributing to the disarray initially in Syria was a serious 3-year drought, causing agricultural populations to move into the cities, causing them to be, because they had lost everything basically, to be much more willing to be an opposition force. And so this issue is critical, and it's not just overseas. When we see these environmental effects in the United States, we're going to have to be prepared, and that means not only DoD, but particularly our National Guard. When there are water emergencies, flooding or drought, we're going to have to be positioned as a military, particularly through our National Guard, to respond. And that response will come not only in providing water or protecting people from water, but also, again, having the organic capacity to operate on our own water and not depending upon supplies that may be compromised or might not be existent. So the bottom line is that operational energy efficiency drives operational effectiveness and saves lives for the military. That's why it's so critical. So this is a bipartisan effort. I want to again thank everyone for being here, and on behalf of the Renewable Energy and Efficiency Council and Caucus, along with Mike Crapo, we had this. Let me extend my best wishes and gratitude. And again, let me thank the panelists for their great insights and discussions. And with that, thank you very, very much.
Okay, thank you.